Um, I want to take care of two small items, then we'll get started. I want to report to you, because I'm part of your property, what happened to me in Jamaica and how important it was to attend the conference on Marcus Garvey in the island where Marcus Garvey was born. It was very significant because Caribbean scholars, mostly top-flight Jamaican scholars, African scholars, some Afro-American scholars, two white women scholars who was about as out of place as a third thumb, but they're trying to establish themselves in the field as the Garvey authorities, and they'll probably succeed, and everybody go to them now for the answers instead of us. But they were there with their spiel. The important thing at a conference on Marcus Garvey in Jamaica is that we're dealing with a contradiction. It's the first time I had been in Jamaica since Siaga. On the night of his election, I was debating on WLIB, and WLIB stayed on late that night. Basil Wilson, who was a Jamaican, and I was debating about what this would mean for the whole Caribbean area. And I said that this means the recolonization of the whole Caribbean area, that it's changed, it would now change from an English sphere of influence to an American sphere of influence. I said, if you think the British as thugs were bad, now you've got some thugs now who won't even clean a knife before they cut your throat. So some black Siaga reporters called the station and asked to speak to me. They said, we know you, we know who you are, we know how you look. If you come to Jamaica again, from the airport, you're going straight to a Jamaican jail or to a Jamaican undertaker. I decided I'm going to risk it. Ain't nothing happened. Ain't nobody threatened me. All good Jamaican friends there to meet me and greet me and to feed me until I could barely walk. Good Jamaican food, good breakfasts. Remind me, it's been so many years since I had kingfish and boiled bananas for breakfast. It was a good homecoming among friends and among people that I had been in many battles with. But the conference itself, except for the contradiction of the two Caucasian women who really didn't have that much to say, the conference itself was very fulfilling. Contradictory too, because some of the most able scholars, all radical, mostly to the left, were there. And while we were there, they gave medals to the Jamaicans who had participated in the invasion of Grenada. The invasion of Grenada is what turned the Caribbean area into an American lake, a sphere of American influence. Jamaica has not improved by virtue of it. There's unemployment, widespread. Young men find very little to do, and most of them who don't want to go into the army are being turned into little thugs. You half of the time you can't even open your car window if it stops for a light. I'm saying that criminality is being produced by virtue of circumstance in an island that I call the Nigeria of the Caribbean, because Jamaica has everything. It could feed itself, has good rainfall, a lot of greenery, a lot of land that's can be productive that's not productive. And when I asked, when everybody, there were so many people there who were nationalists and down with Garvey and everything, and I just stopped the whole thing still by asking, is there anyone here wearing a pair of shoes made in Jamaica by a Jamaican with leather from a Jamaican cow? Is anybody here wearing a shirt made from cloth or cotton grown in Jamaica? No answer. Because they had lost something which still seemed to have been lost throughout the whole of the African world. That is the concept of nation. That was Marcus Garvey's great gift, a reminder to the African world to regain the concept of nation again. And near the end of the lecture, when everybody got so enthusiastic that they're going to install Garvey again, I said, you can get all happy about a dead Marcus Garvey, 47 years dead. But you're not living any Garveyism on this island or any place in the Caribbean. There's a political atmosphere in the Caribbean islands where if Marcus Garvey were alive, advocating the absolute same thing, he might be stoned to death. And I asked, where would Marcus Garvey be safe? In the whole of the Caribbean area. People boasting of the invasion of Grenada, every progressive Caribbean radical either being killed at home or driven away from home, a conservative group taken over, mostly mixed breed mulatto types, color prejudice growing more intense. Here's where they would speak of a brown society and a red man society. And when they say brown in Jamaica, they mean brown. That has that don't have no meaning here at all. Because a brown-skinned black person and a black person, the lynch mob don't make no difference at all, and a taxi cab driver will just pass up one just as quick as the other one. But in Jamaica, that's a separate job category, separate educational category, and sometimes a separate neighborhood. Jamaica is the most stratified of all the islands along color and class lines. But one of the redeeming things on the platform, Jamaica's leading communist, Trayvon Monroe, delivered one of the most fiery indictments of the party and most critical analysis I've ever heard in my life. He said, we have forgotten that this is an island mainly of black people, and this is a society mainly of black people, and we're not going to make the new Jamaica until we understand that. And any time a person is far to the left as Trayvon Monroe, he teaches at the university, he's a PhD, he's a fine scholar. But I happen to think part of his left-leaning is a fake. He was born in the middle class of the brown society, but he wants a reputation as a radical. He's been kind of apologizing for that. And he couldn't help with the fact he was born moderately wealthy. And yet he's Jamaica's leading communist. He's also one of his most brilliant minds. And we noticed, it was a lady that brought this up, that when everybody else spoke, the media didn't turn on the lights to put it on television that evening. But when he spoke, they did that. So now they'll reflect what he said and they'll forget what the rest of us said. But be that as it may, it was a meaningful thing for me personally to be in an island where I spent a lot of time. When I was writing the Garvey book, I spent 4 summers there, and part of some other time I did something which I rarely do on a book. I accepted literally demanded a large advance, $10,000, before I finished the book. So I went to Jamaica and lived beyond my means. I'm glad somebody benefited from it. House, made everything, got the whole works. My little daughter, that was before my son was born. So fond memories of the island, also some pain, because the island has never made the best of itself. The Rastas were there and fully debating everything, and also bringing forth about the only advocacy of a true African culture in Jamaica, in spite of the fact that I think on some points the Rastas are a little bit mixed up. But be that as it may, they're confused by Haile Selassie, but I know you don't argue about a Rasta and about a Rasta's affection for Haile Selassie. You don't. That's the point. You just leave alone because you're wasting your time anyway. So time can be better spent. But the Rastas, who spoke up quite nicely and very articulate, said that we don't bend. That's what we believe in. The Rastas do not bend. No compromise, no nothing. And they brought up the fact that the reggae singer, musician who followed Bob Marley was Peter Tosh. And there was no use for him being murdered. He was a popular cultural hero. And his influence was growing in Jamaica. And all he was singing was freedom songs from the point of view of the Rastas. I think eventually the government might feel threatened by them and turn against them. Why I've spoken about Jamaica is that in addition to being the largest island, has one of the better university educational systems. It is the island that was expected to lead the whole of the Caribbean and could have done that in regard to the whole of the Caribbean. It has the mind to do it. It has the intellects to do it. It has the technicians to be the builders of the Caribbean. And yet they have not fulfilled that mission. They're a little bit shamefaced about Siaga. They kept telling you these are Lebanese. Stop lying to me about being a Lebanese. This is a Boston white man and a con man. He came in and put something over on you, took over. And with all the brilliant minds born in Jamaica, you tell me you can't find a single Jamaican to lead you. You got to go to Boston and get a hustler. Come on, knock it off. But I got back safely, and those who promised to kill me didn't kill me. And I was surrounded by wonderful friends, good intellects who, when they differed with me, they differed with some degree of respect and affection, as I differed with them with a degree of respect and affection. And that is the way it should be. When black people differ with each other, they don't have to destroy each other about it. They can still be protective and differ with each other. The other item I'd hoped to take up, and I didn't hope to take up this much time, was the series Shaka Zulu. Because so many people have written me or called me one of what is the book. There is no the book. I read 30 books on Zulu culture before I was clear about what it was. The series was an absolute disgrace. It demeaned one of the greatest people we produced in Africa and one of the fightingest people we produced in Africa. It was the Zulus that kept the whites from the hinterland. And the Zulus did not fight. Shaka in his day did not fight whites or have to fight whites. He was fighting to consolidate blacks in order to preserve the country for African people. And had he won, he might have taken more black casualties, but he would have saved South Africa for blacks. Now, the role of that picture was to show a grappling tyrant so that white people will get the idea, if an African took over, this is what's in store for you. Had you read any books on it, you would have known how disgraceful it was. Shaka's mother, one of the great women of Zulu history, was made to look like a Western slut. Africans do not speak about sex the way you saw them speak about sex in that picture. A woman do not turn to a man and say, I would have been queen and you king only because of what's between your legs. African women don't speak that way. They're not vulgar dogs. The lowest class of African woman has more class than that. Why didn't we make the film? And we're not going to get the true story until we make the film. We own the camera, we do the script, we do everything. Finance it and distribute it. And in the scene where they have the men driving Nanda Chaka's mother away, that's totally fake. It was the women who drove her away. And they didn't drive her away. The other wives had given birth to daughters. She was the first wife to give birth to a son. This caused some jealousy. And so the wives began to tabulate the months between the marriage and the birth of the son, and they found it was short a few weeks, indicating there could have been some relationship before the marriage. And they used this to threaten the king that if you don't let her go, we will tell the superior king Jobe, and who will subsequently remove him. But the treatment of women and Shaka's response to his mother was not that of a grappling mama's boy. It was one of the, no matter what it sounds to your Western mind, it was one of the greatest tribute a man ever paid to a woman that gave him birth. When she died, he ordered 15,000 soldiers to guard her grave for a year. He maimed the cows so that they could mourn for her. He punished people for laughing. Everybody should be mourning for her. She was called the great elephant because that's character in Africa. See, Africa, you call people by something that means strength and character. You better not call a woman an elephant in this society. But when Shaka said to the Zulu people, no cohabitation for a year, the old women called the council. In spite of the fact that this is a patrilineal society, as against matrilineal, the lineage coming down through the female side, the women still had power. And they said, our king has outlawed life itself. Now it is time for him to go. And ceremoniously, he was put to death. And when he entered, they said that only royal hands, he's royal, and only royal hands can touch him. Two of his half-brothers ceremoniously put him to death. In his words, that you think by killing me you will be king. You will be the bondsmen and the slaves. Whites are waiting like ants to move in here and take this country. When they struck him the second time unsuccessfully, he said that the dreams of man wax and wane. Some things go on forever. You have called me many things, he said. Tyrant, God, saint, devil. To some extent, I am all of these things. But I am something else you should remember. I'm the best hope you have for freedom from the white man in this century. When they struck him that final blow, he shook his head and looked at them with pity and said, "Oh, what have I done to you, sons of my fathers?" The last of a warrior whose military technique is studied in the military schools of the world right now. The infantry broken field running was taken from the study of Shaka. The Germans made the best study. All right, when I finish this series, and I'm going to try to space it such a way, and I will come out and do special lectures. I wanted to do a special lecture on who are the Zulu people. Then another one that I've done before, but need to be done again, South Africa before apartheid. You're not going to ever understand South Africa, you understand Calvinism. Because Calvinism said that these Christians are ordained by God to rule over the lesser breeds. And the Calvinists have declared that Africans are lesser breeds. And when anytime someone says that God told me to do what I'm doing, you have a hard time making him believe he should feel guilty for doing it. That's the Boers. We need more explanation because on so many subjects people have not read one book. Not even one book. And I began to rehearse. I read 3 books for a lecture, for a common lecture. I have 13 books on the required reading list in the college when I'm teaching a class. The chairman told me that's too much. The students are complaining that's too much reading, so I cut it down to 7. I said, I won't cut it no more. So 13 required reading books and about 25 or 30 suggested reading lists. I educated myself, and I educated myself pretty well. Reading. And so, if I have anything to give, it is because during the period of the McCarthy era, when all the radicals were crying about haven't get any job, having no place to work, everybody blacklisting me, I took a thankless job at NBC at night. And chief of maintenance, night chief of maintenance, meaning I wasn't too proud to work, and worked up to being head of the typing pool and being kind of a studio manager, which is a glorified job for a head porter. Glorified way. But I was making nice money working at night. I never thought in my life I'd make $4.80 an hour. That don't sound like much now, but over 20 years ago, that was pretty decent. So I worked at night and wrote in the day. But among the things I did was to write an entire book on Africans who resisted colonialism. I've written on a biography of all of the Zulu warriors, from Shaka to Bambaataa, who fought the last Zulu war. And while I'm not that anxious to get the series over, this is the 8th lecture, so that means there isn't that many more left. I would be relaxed to know that I can come occasionally and do special lectures on special subjects about things that you need to know, things that I've accumulated information on that you may not have had time to accumulate information on. Oh, Lord. Now, after this long preface, I will now get into the subject for this evening. Mainly because all these things happened since I've seen you last. Now, I'm going to talk about the rise and fall of the civil rights movement. And I think the word civil rights is poorly used here. What we're talking about is the African feeling throughout the world that he was outside of the nation concept. In the United States, I said that we are a nation within a nation searching for a nationality. And our search for a nationality has been frustrating because we were not brought to the United States to be given democracy. We were not brought to the United States to be given citizenship. Of all the Africans who came or were brought against their will to the New World, we black Americans inherited the worst white people on earth. Europe dumped its human garbage can into the New World. The worst of that garbage can was dumped into the United States. Their intentions not only were not good toward us, their intentions were not good toward their own people. And this is a country, I've said before, found for free white Protestant males, middle class and up, those who agreed with the prevailing political status quo and who owned property. And when they said liberty and justice for all in this country, that's who they meant. That's who they meant and nothing more. Didn't mean women, didn't mean their own women. Didn't mean Jews, didn't mean Catholics. Look at the religion of the founding fathers. All Protestant, all middle class, all slaveholders. These are the people that decide that we're 1/5, 3/5 of men. And somebody else then had to vote for us. I'm saying that the civil rights movement in the United States was not something in isolation. It was part of a world movement. And it came at the time of the African freedom explosion being set in motion, having started in a formal way at the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, England, 1945. These post-war radical activities of African people throughout the world. Now, in the Caribbean islands, the civil rights movement came concurrent with the fight for independence and federation. It came at a time personalities, certain Caribbean political personalities and some academic personalities were converted into political personalities. Eric Williams of Trinidad under other circumstances, would never have been a politician. He's too impractical to be a politician. Can't lie, can't steal, can't act, can't fake out nothing. Stand before an audience and tell the truth, tell your whole desire. He can't lie to the people, change. Now, when he came to power, on his way to power in Trinidad, he actually said, I'll take the American Air Base and turn them into cornfields. He meant it, too. But when he got a nation to run and a budget to balance, America's paying so much per year to have an airfield, and a cornfield yields so little in comparison, he had to keep the American bases. Had to go back on his own promise. A true politician wouldn't have been that ideal. Because then a true politician would have found a lie that he could have gotten out of easily. I'm not saying there's no honest politicians, but there may be a few here and there. Now, Eric Williams is now facing other giant personalities. Grantley Adams of Barbados, Norman Manley of Jamaica. All of these personalities, strong and stubborn, wanting to have their way, literally stood in the way of Caribbean Federation because each one wanted it their particular way. Now, the compromise, inasmuch as Williams was stubborn and impractical, Norman Manley was arrogant, overbearing. Then his cousin Buster Manty, another who was a true politician, a hustler and a liar and a fake, but a very colorful one, finally would move him out of the way. But the compromise was Grantley Adams. Grantley Adams had said, and a lot of people forgot it, that his great wish is to have his wife addressed as Lady Adams. So if he wanted knighthood more than he wanted independence, then he had to pay the price of knighthood, and you can't defy the British and be knighted too. You got to kowtow to them. And when you kowtow to them, you generally betray your own people. So you had a man who wanted something personal more than he wanted the unification of the Caribbean. And he made a good speech at a Laborite rally once, and a lot of people started hailing him as the great Laborite, throwing him up, the Laborite. Grantley Adams was never a Laborite. In truth, he was never a Laborite. He used the party, and they naively let him use it. So he couldn't pull all those peoples together. That wasn't his greatest concern anyway. Now with Norman Manley partly out of the picture, thanks to the rise of Buster Manty, Buster ended up being Sir Buster Manley. The Sirs don't deliver, because the Sirs pay the price of becoming Sirs. If that means a lot to you, then you have to understand you don't get Sirs without prices. The British don't give away knighthood to people that they think are going to fight them. Study the rise of India. Many Indians the British want to co-opt refused knighthood. But knighthood took the sting, took the fire, the craving for knighthood out of a lot of Caribbean politics. Now, had this been otherwise, had there been a good Caribbean Union, there could have been the Caribbean Defense Force. And when you put the whole Caribbean together, all those islands together, East Caribbean, and the rest of the Caribbean, you got a sizable nation and a sizable striking force. England's not nothing but an island either. And Jamaica is measures put in nicely in comparison to England in measurement. I'm not saying the same size, but you measure one against the other and look at what one is doing and what the other one is not doing. Jamaica could speak very well for itself as the headquarters for the defense of the Caribbean. But you would have an army. There would have been no invasion of Grenada if the Caribbean had an army, because Grenada was so small and undefended, a good Boy Scout troop could have taken it over. Because they weren't trying to be defended. They weren't trying to be military. They were trying to develop an island, decent tourism, an air force, an air base that they could, well, heavy planes could land. They weren't trying to threaten nobody, unlike the lie that America tell you was going to, Russian bombers was going to land there. They ain't thinking about no Russians. They're thinking about themselves. And rightly so. Now you got a bunch of black Marxists arguing among themselves as to who's the most Marxist. Then they killed one of the finest leaders to emerge among the young people of the Caribbean in the 20th century, Maurice Bishop. Now you can see what happened to their revolution. But in Africa, it's a more coordinated revolt leading to the independence explosion because it has lasted longer and has more consistency. Why it would emerge first in Ghana is because the people of Ghana are more or less homogeneous, meaning culturally, while there's difference in the culture, they have settled the differences to the point where they do not fight each other into death. They fight, but they reach a point where, it's enough of that. And they call in somebody to settle it. But settle it by nearly always one of their own. They don't call in the British to settle it. They call a council and get it settled. So there was a less bitterness existing between Ghanaians. When you went to Nigeria, you had a different situation. You got the majority, the physical majority, the numerical majority are Muslims, stubborn as a snake, who don't yield anything. Then you got the new Christians, you got the Igbos are mostly Catholics. The Yorubas are mostly Protestants. So they're divided on that. And you got few national parties, mainly one under Zeke, but no other national parties. Really, you got 3 or 4 nations slapped together for English convenience. Originally, the area called Nigeria was not Nigeria. The North was a separate cultural and linguistic area. The East was separate, and the West was separate. So now you have all over Africa, because of divided borders and divided cultures, there's some difficulty in getting a united nation because it's difficult to get a united culture and get agreements from some of the larger culture groups to respect the other groups. All right, now, coming back to the United States, the movement is misunderstood because originally the movement was not about civil rights. The movement had been going on most of this century And the movement was about equal treatment. And if you go back to the Plessy versus Ferguson case, 1 year after Booker T. Washington's famous Atlanta expedition speech, they began to make Jim Crow laws saying it could be separate so long as it was equal. It was separate, but it was never equal. Now, what African people were fighting for was basic justice. And where the NACP went wrong, yes, the NACP went wrong, seeming to think that the ultimate prize was integration. And a lot of social integration became nothing but physical body bumping. People meet and they bump into you and smile with a cocktail glass. You come in strangers, you end up strangers. I was at a party last night and I saw a Negro. Smiled at him. That's a liberal now. And the Negro said that white people are all right. I was at a party, you know, they treated me nicely. He never got to know them. They never got to know him. Now this social integration started during the so-called Harlem Renaissance, because it was the thing to have a black person at your party. There was a lot of unemployed, college-graduated black people who were preying on gullible white people. They could go to the party and tilt their glasses neatly with the rest of them. They were social parasites, but they were better actors. They would say, pronounce it vichyssoise and some of these other dishes as though they've been eating it all their life instead of pig knuckles and all that stuff. That period would fade with the Depression when the search for the exotic Negro among the whites, the noble savage, passed. So when we came into the Depression period, the preface to the civil rights struggle had started. And it really started with a fight for basic, decent housing. But in education, it started with a fight for equal pay for teachers. And this fight for equal pay for teachers was converted into equal education. Now, a lot of this was toned down somewhat during the Second World War. But a brilliant lawyer, Thurgood Marshall, a brilliant lawyer and a very humanistic lawyer, it's a pity you never got to know Thurgood Marshall before he became a stiff Supreme Court justice. Thurgood was one of the most enjoyable human beings you could possibly meet. You could meet and talk all night and see who could tell the biggest lie. Thurgood would beat us all out by telling the biggest one. And go over cases he's done. Thurgood's technician approach to the law went a long way. The NACP was effectively radical during that period and a very valuable organization during that period. Now, you can't compare the NACP then with the NACP now. Because in the last issue of the Crisis magazine, the NACP, some of you must be members and some of you must have gotten the last issue. They are debating as to whether the black colleges should stay in business now that we have access to the mainstream. They're questioning whether is any need to have them. The fact that they debated it is an insult. You do not debate, no matter where you go and how many other colleges let your children in, you do not debate whether there should be some colleges that you control from bottom up. And in a discussion of the matter, I found myself not getting my point across, and I just simplified it. I said, look, if we don't have some black colleges, where else can the black girl be the homecoming queen? They looked at me. Now they understood me. She's never going to be the homecoming queen in Notre Dame. She ain't going to be the homecoming queen at Harvard or Yale. She's going to be the homecoming queen at a black school or no homecoming queen at all. I'm saying that you don't approach Italians and say, dismantle your institution. The Swedes have a university in Minnesota called Olag. Nobody called them racist. All kind of people go to the university, but Swedes control it, and you better know that when you hit the door. That's a Swedish-controlled university. When you go to Brandeis or Einstein, when you hit the door, you know that's Jewish control, and it's going to stay that way. When you go to Harvard, that's white Protestant. Young men to be supporters of a capitalist system that got its start by enslaving you. Now, if you go to Harvard with any other illusions, you're going with the wrong illusion. Now, we're beginning in the 30s, as we moved out of the 30s, on the eve of the Second World War, we're beginning to get some kind of education, because as this war got underway, most of us knew it wasn't a war for the liberation of anyone. Neither World War I or II was to liberate anyone. And when people speak about the Holocaust, as though this is the first time a large number of people have been murdered, we were murdered in larger numbers. And the people who now talk about the Holocaust had nothing to say about it. But after not one editorial appeared in a white newspaper in defense of Ethiopia. Their sovereignty was taken away. We had learned some lessons from that event as we entered and was called on to participate in the Second World War. African soldiers who went into this war would come out of the war having been trained and instructed to kill white people. He would go back to his country. Said, no, if it's all right to kill one, there's some still here oppressing us. What about that? And these ideals was becoming dangerous. And so giving these Africans clerk jobs simply wasn't enough. Now, back to the United States. With us, depressions come early and stay late. While the depression might start ending with white people around 39, it still hadn't ended with us, because we were not in on the job market. Roosevelt, a genius at manipulation, didn't really care too much for blacks. He was an aristocrat, didn't care too much for poor people, black or white. And yet we had someone in the White House who did a pretty good job of looking after our interests. 2 women, 1 white, 1 black. Mary McLeod Bethune was one, head of the Youth Administration, and who never called Franklin Delano Roosevelt Mr. President, called him Franklin as though he was a schoolboy, shook her fist in his face, as bold as anybody. But we did have a genuine friend and supporter in Eleanor Roosevelt. And when blacks wanted to get to the president, they went through her. So when A. Philip Randolph threatened to march on Washington in the middle of the war, he got to see the president through Mrs. Roosevelt. Now this is the beginning, this is the embryo, this is the rehearsal for what's going to be the Civil Rights Movement. We have mistreated A. Philip Randolph terribly because in his last 10 years he was old and broken in health and somewhat senile and in the pay of Albert Shanker and that phony Bart Rustin may rest in peace. But A. Philip Randolph was one period one of the most effective leaders we had. He goes in and sees the president, and I've seen 3 presidents in my life, and if you give black people 20 minutes, they spend 15 minutes thanking him for seeing them. I promise I never go in again with another group of blacks to see the president. It's downright ridiculous and humiliating. They never tell the man who they want, what they want. When Mrs. Roosevelt got the appointment for Randolph to see the president, Randolph entered the door, putting down his peel, telling him what he wanted. So the president was supposed to say, Philip, aren't you going to at least hang up your hat? He had taken off his hat and coat. He ain't got no time to thank nobody for nothing. He didn't even thank Mrs. Roosevelt for making the appointment. I want an FEPC, Fair Employment Practices Bill. Now, he would meet the president a number of times. And that 3rd time, Roosevelt was supposed to say, now, Philip, you wouldn't march on Washington and disgrace your country in the middle of a war, would you, Philip? And he said, yes, Mr. President. You know the ramifications of such a thing in the middle of a war. We could even shoot you for treason and all of that. He said, Mr. President, I think you misunderstand me. I am a people's messenger. I'm just delivering a message that the people gave me. I have to give them a clear answer. And they're going to march. If they don't get what they want, they're going to march if they have to march over me and you. So he said, all right, Philip, give me 24 hours. Think about it. Less than 24 hours, he called Randolph. Said that he's going to issue an executive order. Not going to take it to Congress. It's an emergency now. And the president can do this. The president got a whole lot of power we don't use. He'll make an executive order that calmed Randolph down. And Randolph decided not to march on Washington. But Randolph had gotten the one item on the top of his agenda. In the middle, well, blacks wasn't getting any jobs. They had a hard time getting porter jobs in some of these factories. Now they were getting some decent jobs. Some jobs, technician jobs. And Randolph had brought it all, thanks to his relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt would never have done anything of this sort without her pressure. So she was our president in the White House, and after Mayor McLeod Bethune was on ill health for certain political contact, and we had to rely on this. All right, the thing is drawing to an end. We have a Jim Crow army. Near the end, there's a fight because Roosevelt had also issued an executive order against discrimination on Army base. And they continued to discriminate. But now, there was a move to integrate the Army. Because many of the blacks they took over as service units, once the Germans hit their line and started pushing them back, they got everything. Black, white, cooks, everything. To bring up on the line to stop those Germans. The Germans had lost the war, and they knew that. But the Germans wanted to show them a piece of soldiering one more time. So they hit the American line and pushed it back so far, Americans had to eliminate all this separation and drop every American soldier they could get. Now they would drop the black American soldier. And he would give a decent account of themselves in spite of the fact that during the war, a law went out, not a law, but a directive, went to office. It's a confidential, top secret memo saying that no matter how brave black soldiers are, no soldier will be given the Congressional Medal of Honor doing this. No black soldier. This is all documented. I was a sergeant major, so these top flight secret memos had to pass through my desk before I would take them and put them in the safe and lock them up for the commander. They didn't know that I read them before I put them in the safe. And sometimes if there was an extra copy, it got lost. One called Command of Negro Troops, telling officers how to treat blacks. Make sure that they salute you, etc., etc., and even tell them to stop addressing them as boys, but you know, all of that. But why this memo about not giving any black person the Congressional Medal of Honor? There's a stipulation in the Congressional Medal of Honor that a winner of the Congressional Medal, the highest medal the nation has to offer, can address the combined houses of Congress and the Senate on his demand. No one has ever demanded it, but they thought that one day one black man might read the fine print and say, all right, now get you fellas together, I got something to say. They wasn't taking any chance. They give him, so therefore they didn't give him one, no matter how brave he was. And there was many blacks who performed brave deeds equal to congressional awards in this war. So we came out of the war brooding, bitter, questioning whether we should have participated in it in the first place and not knowing how we could have gotten out of it if we wanted to. Now, there was a recession following the war, which is a minor rehearsal for a depression. We still wasn't getting the jobs. Fair employment practice was over. So there was no law literally demanding that we get our share of the technical jobs or the jobs any place. 1945, blacks began to come out, 1947. In the 50s, lynching still going on. One soldier, Woodard, had his eyes gouged out in his uniform on his way to his home in Florida. When two soldiers were lynched in uniform in my hometown, Columbus, Georgia, I made up my mind that I might die in a war one day, but it won't be this one, because John going to save himself. So I became such a wizard at administration, I was eliminated from going overseas as being essential to the war effort in the United States as a trainer of enlisted personnel in administration. Know it for sure because I wrote the letter myself. No. And when I came out, 46, I'm trying to get my life back together again. I'm trying to get back into activities. I was very effective in the old history club around the Harlem Y. Let's be that as it may. But now, a young politician that I had known as assistant pastor, that I'd worked with and becoming the first black city councilman, is now congressman. Harlem is now a congressional district. Mitchell is in Congress, so you got practically only two congressmen. But Adam is effective and popular. There need to be a separate lecture on Adam. Adam used less than 1/10 of his talent and was still the most effective politician we ever sent to Washington. Wonder what, if had he used his full talent, what would have happened? But one of the main reasons that Adam really wasn't afraid of white folks, practically being one himself, he would stand toe-to-toe and fight things out. He would bargain. And besides, he was a good legislator. You see, he barely passed the bar as a lawyer, but he sure knew law when he got there. He knew how to manipulate it. He was a very effective man. In spite of all the playing around, he got some jobs done, some meaningful jobs done. Now, in the 50s, when we went into the 50s, crisis, not much better. The debate now on the integration of the Army, and one of the persons who opposed the integration of the Army most, this is a public record, was Dwight D. Eisenhower. And this man would later come to the presidency of the United States. Now, you assume that 1954 was the culmination of a whole lot of things. It really wasn't. And when the Supreme Court issued the law against segregation in schools, blacks were kind of cynical about it. Oh, come on, we know these people don't want to do it. We were right. They hadn't integrated the schools yet. But they've given us a whole lot of illusions about being integrated. And we sent our children into schools where they were not wanted, where psychologically they were cut to pieces, and some of them will never recover. Because we did not prepare them to understand the abuse and the bigotry of teachers. And we did not take on these school boards to make sure that there was a decent curriculum in the school system where we got our share of a place in history. We haven't done that yet. Because they go and study history and find that their own people are left out of history. They approach history, though Europe is all of history. The world waited in darkness for Europeans to bring the light. So now, being integrated into a system where the teachers hate your guts and the students hate your guts was not much of an achievement. And turn our children over to our enemies to be educated when we haven't read enough books and done enough homework to educate them first at home, to give them the strength to withstand was a form of child genocide. We haven't corrected that mistake yet. So now, before the decision, there was restlessness among the black youth, the college youth. The real movement did not start with the Supreme Court decision. But the Supreme Court decision set a lot of action in motion, a lot of illusions in motion, a lot of things we have not successfully examined, a lot of assumptions. It's all over now. We won it all. We got it. We don't have to worry about that anymore. Nothing like that at all. Prejudice is deep in this country. This is a country designed in bigotry. Constitution made in bigotry. Amendments made by bigots. And they have told you again and again, as Judge Tanner said during the Dred Scott decision, the Negro has no rights the white man is bound to respect. That's still the basic thinking of every white man in this country. If he gives you something, well, he's just paternalistic enough, condescending enough to give you, but you don't have to do it. As he give it, he can take it back, and very often he does take it back. Now, the fight for integration on the lunch counters, the fight for basic hotel accommodation. But the hinge upon which the civil rights movement moved and got started was the lunch counters and the buses. The boycott, the bus boycott, the general boycott of buses and interstate travel, and the lunch counters. That got the movement underway. Not the Supreme Court decision of 54. But now, a man named Dixon in Montgomery, a very effective leader, was looking around for someone to front the southern aspect of the movement. He went to Abernathy and told Abernathy that, I like this young man who's taken over Ebenezer Baptist. I think I can make some use of him. He may not know it, but he's going to be the new leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So when Abernathy approached King, King said no. Then finally King came around and said yes. One of the reasons the blacks didn't want Dixon is that Dixon was a common, ordinary Pullman porter. Dixon had found new curse words, split infinitives. Like most black people, he could make a new language out of the old language. In a university town where black people who could speak pretty and proper, he knew that they would be impressed by a young minister who spits out dictionaries, looked good, and just married, first child born, and he's acceptable. Blacks rely maybe too much on style and less on accomplishment. So Dixon made King. He's still alive. The world has forgotten him, partly forgotten Rosa Parks. He wanted a test case, but he wanted a test case that was going to hold up. And one girl he had picked out to test the bus case. He wanted it to be done by a woman because he understood emotional appeal. Then he discovered that she had had a child without benefit of husband or parental approval. He knew that the whites would make the wrong use of that, so he withdrew her for Rosa Parks. And that brought it off. She was absolutely right for the part of refusing to move back. And he knew that he was going to start a bus boycott. King did not start the bus boycott. Dixon started. But this would set in motion Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the basics movement in the South. Now, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had already been started, principally by Ella Baker, who died only early this year. September Clark, another brilliant black woman, was teaching at the Highlander School. Another one, Mississippi, trying to fight her way out of that situation. There were giants among the women, giants among the men, and there was no argument about who did what. Each one did what they could best do without any kind of argument. Most of the arguments now going on is downright silly. Makes no kind of sense at all. Because white sociology have told us what we're supposed to think about men and women. They've told us that there was a war going on between black men and women, so because they said so, and if we don't see any war, we start one to fit into their script. They said the strong black woman is taking the manhood from the strong black man. Strong black women are part of our history. And we helped to make them, approved of them, boasted of them, rode behind them as the first women in the world to ride in front of their armies, not to come behind, but right in front, lead. It didn't cause us any less manhood. Sometimes they followed, sometimes they led. White people make a nonsense about this because they're afraid of women. Still are. But we never manifested in societies what we control and created. We never manifested any fear of women. We had great respect for them. And when in our folk history, early history, we had to explain what makes the sun comes up and what makes it come down, we gave the assignment to a woman, the goddess Nut. Your job is to take down the sun in the evening and bring it back out in the morning. Why did we give the job to a man? Because the woman is the giver of life. It's very logical that the woman would take down the sun and put it back up in the morning. These allegorical stories the Africans told to illustrate a point. We refer to the earth as her. The tree is her. We refer to most living things in the feminine gender. That don't mean we were less men, we were less afraid of women, less fearful of her superior position in the society. That means she was not over or under us. She was totally a part of us, an extension of us. We didn't argue in these societies about what a woman's place. You don't argue about your mother. How stupid would that be? You man gonna argue about whether his mother is equal? You have to come out of an icebox in Europe to be that stupid. If she gave you a life, then there's no argument about whether she's equal to you. Can you give birth to a baby? I don't believe it. Now, this movement is underway. The students are getting it underway, challenging. But now the students are coming under the sway of Martin Luther King and the Southern Leadership Conference. The NAACP is complaining because they said that all of you people get into trouble without my consent, and we're the one that bailed you out. That was partly true. NAACP was getting money they never thought they would get, and so they were bailing people out. A lot of the young blacks were going to jail, especially John Lewis and others. Julian Bond was told purposely to stay out of jail so you can want to get the bail money to get us out. So Julian was never in jail because he was told not to go to jail. They didn't want pretty Julian to be hurt anyway. They didn't think he could fight very well. They didn't think any good purpose would be served by putting Julian in jail or letting him go. They gave him a job. He was the clerk in the office, the chief clerk. Now the movement is taking on. It's actually getting a world relationship. But something would happen in 1957 that we need to make an assessment of. In 1957, when Nkrumah announced the independence of Ghana by saying, "At last the long night is over. Ghana, our beloved country, is free forever." We should have sat down and reassessed all of the wandering ideas away from home. Pan-Africanism, a lonely child in the West, had found a home. Now we had found geography, land. Now we could speak of something other than ideals. We could speak of something under our feet that we could feel sure of. 1957 was a new day. And we have not made the proper assessment of 1957 and the independence of Ghana. We've not made the proper assessment of the Fifth Pan-African Congress, 1945. But 1957 was as a result of 1945. Now, soon after Ghana became independent, some African nations were becoming independent by the week. 1958, because I had known Nkrumah in old Harlem history clubs where he used to come in the summers in the 30s, I thought I would at last go to Africa. Didn't have the money, borrowed part of it from one person, another part from another person, a little bit from a bank, but I got there. Pittsburgh Courier owed me some money, and they sent me a bounce check. I was all the way in Africa. I had studied the Akan people of Ghana, their history, studied on paper. So I decided not to live among the Akans. I would live among non-Akan people, so I can study them and their history. But I was to see Nkrumah again. George Padmore I had known, advisor to Nkrumah. I was to see him again. And briefly see L.R. James. I was to see the awakening of a nation in Ghana that had confidence in themselves, a black people so proud of themselves you could cut it with a knife. You can feel the radiation of their pride. We'll have to talk some other time of what happened to it and how it was disrupted. Because whites did not intend to let this glow of independence last too long, because Ghana was Africa's beating heart. Now the movement was moving like leaps and bounds here in the United States. There had been a march on Washington called a prayer march on Washington. before the massive march on Washington, before the 1963 march, blacks was getting something they never had in their life, good media, practically overexposure. While King was advocating nonviolence, he did not understand that there was a violent alternative waiting in the wings just in case his violence didn't work. Big Bad Malcolm and the Nation of Islam. But he never put it together. What Mahatma Gandhi did in India and why he got independence, when the British got reluctant with his nonviolence, he said that there are 70 million Sikhs in the northwest frontier of India. They don't believe in nonviolence. They handle a knife so well, you think all of them were trained surgeons. I wave my hand and they're going to come to my assistance. They had told him and the British, if Gandhi's nonviolence don't work, our violence will work. Now you choose between what you want. So they gave Gandhi part of what he wanted to keep them from taking it. King was a Christian, and I think a great one, and a great minister, a great humanitarian, a great teacher. But he was not a politician. Gandhi was a politician, a liar, an actor, would do whatsoever got the job done. Call for a lie, tell a lie. King was a believer in the Judeo-Christian ethic, and he stuck to it. He believed in it. He acted it out. I'm saying that King was a good human being, but not a revolutionary freedom fighter in that sense. Not willing to sacrifice any Christian principles, but thought he would move within those principles. Now, the massive march on Washington, which seemed to be the culmination of civil rights movement, was really the beginning of the decline. Because now, several organizations were tied together. Kennedy money, Kennedy Foundation money, manipulated by a man named Curry. They put together approximately $1 million to be divided between Southern Leadership Conference, SNCC, Dorothy Heights Organization, the National Council of Negro Women, the NACP. They were called the Big Six. Independent, all of these organizations were effective. Tied together, they were not effective. So effective leadership began to decline with the March on Washington. The bombing continued, the church burning continued. In other words, the cracker didn't get the signal, and he didn't let up. Nobody was giving him the signal. Briefly, the Deacons for Justice kind of made some of them slow down or back off a little bit because they said they're going to fight. Dissatisfaction in SNCC caused quite a few of them to form a separate, more radical group called the Black Consciousness Group. Now, the paper on Black Consciousness that I still have a carbon copy of was made up in my office at How You Act in Harlem when I was head of the culture wing of the anti-poverty program. They called a Roots Day Black Consciousness Conference in New Orleans. None of us stayed in hotels. We stayed in different people's houses and ate in different restaurants. And the man that gave the most to the conference, the most space, and the most money was a local black crook called Big Time Crip. An enlightened crook. Run pool rooms. That didn't make him a crook. What made him a crook was petty after-hour gambling joints and racetrack manipulation and numbers, you know, all of that. But very much enlightened. So out of this came a conference at Selma, Alabama on Roots Day, dealing with roots. We were using the word long before Haley. We got a flat truck and was moving from farm to farm, lecturing to farmers during their lunch hour. Got painfully close to Columbus, to Union Springs, Alabama, where I was born. And in one place, I found one of my cousins was selling fish. She didn't make any to do by it when she saw me, other than the fact that you come this close to your home, where you were, your birthplace, and not going to even visit aunt somebody or somebody that I had forgotten anyway. But we made an impression because a lot of blacks have been driven off the farm for voting, for living in tents. Now, the turning point for King for a total reconsideration of nonviolence was the bombing in Birmingham. When those kids were bombed, when Martin Luther King came into Birmingham before they could be buried and made a statement, and this is a direct quote, "If blood must flow, let it be our blood and not the blood of our white brothers." He was not only wrong, he was vulgar. The kids hadn't even been buried. And for people to let their children be killed in Sunday school, if you can't provoke them to fight then when are you going to do it? I think the time had reached to renegotiate the whole concept of nonviolence. So all bets are off. While he could have personally continued with nonviolence, I think he should have released his people from the plague at that point. They have a right to defend themselves no matter what I do, especially defend their children in Sunday school. If a child cannot peacefully go in church and pray in safety, then you no longer have a democratic nation, you no longer have a Christian nation. You have a fascist, authoritarian nation. And you have to stop kidding yourself about it. When you have that, you're supposed to fight. Now, the disenchantment with King had started. And this would have a culmination during the Selma March, when the government deliberately told the police to hold fire, not to disturb the march, and let King march. But after King was back in Atlanta, they also agreed not to attack the young marchers moving across that bridge in Selma. They were attacked with sticks and horses and everything. Guns, which was a betrayal. That attack not only betrayed the marchers, it betrayed the government itself. So Alabama had staged a minor civil war by turning against the government of the United States and beating the heads and trampling horses over civil rights workers. Now the disenchantment is wide within the movement. During that first Black consciousness meeting in New Orleans, there was a young man standing by, observing, not saying very much, smiling once in a while, a little comment on the lady. The young man was Stokely Carmichael. And when we showed up at Selma for another march, the Roots Day thing, he was there all the time listening. This is where he got the concept of calling for black power. Because we had called for the identical same thing in New Orleans and in the meetings in the backwoods of Selma, Alabama. This is how history plays peculiar tricks on different people. We don't care who got credit for what. It's of no consequence to us one way or the other. We are glad that he was smart enough to pick it up and make capital out of it. Or did he remember to do so? Because we did not. We didn't think of it in that way. We called for consciousness of being black and consciousness of knowing that black people had to be defended. We were 18 miles from the nearest telephone, the backwoods of Selma, Alabama. The Ku Klux Klan came to shoot at us every night. The second night, we got rifles and started shooting back. It's an incident, unrecorded, except the fact that most of the people who participated are still alive, walking around. They didn't come those last nights. We shot out the tires to let them know that if they came down there physically, we had some more firepower. We wasn't against Martin Luther King. We just felt the time had come when some black people need to stand up and defend themselves. If you're going to be killed anyway, we thought we'd just take some company with us. And that was the decision. Now, after the death of King and Kennedy, the movement began to decline, but the movement throughout the world began to decline. The movement in the Caribbean was in shambles. The Federation movement was in shambles. In Africa, the coups had already started that would eventually depose of Nkrumah's power. And some of the most able leaders of African nations would be knocked off, or exiled, or killed. All of this is set up by international intelligence because the Western world, wanting the minerals of Africa and wanting them under their control, had decided that they would never permit Africa's riches to fall into Africa's hands. Now, this is basically how they knocked off Ghana. Buying cocoa from Ghana. They bought up a lot of cocoa, beat the prices down, so Ghana had to literally sell its cocoa practically at cost. And when Ghana sold the cocoa at cost, Ghana did not have enough revenue to hold its government together and to support all of the different new things Nkrumah had started. Now, the same people who beat its prices down helped to destroy its economy pointed and said, look, they call themselves socialist, they can't even feed themselves. Nkrumah was trying something called scientific socialism, and he was being told that nothing is scientific that fails to work for you. He was a little bit stubborn. Some of the most able men around him are now disappearing. He would make another glaring mistake. Some of the exiled communists from South Africa, whites, went to Ghana, pretended they were defenders of Ghana, and one became his appointment secretary, a man named Besna. You couldn't even see Nkrumah unless you went through Besna. There was a time when Nkrumah had open house on Wednesday, and any Ghanaian, any grievance could come in and see him. So that was good. Didn't have to make an appointment. Just wait your turn and see the president. This was the time he was going to villages, opening schools. People were seeing him all parts of the country. Had a mobile medical unit moving across the country. So in other words, you would have an ear specialist, eye specialist one day. The next day, the maternity specialist would be there. I mean, so medical service, well, you didn't have hospitals every place, but you had medical services and trailers visiting the countryside. So the people would have a specific consultancy in medicine almost every day or so. The people felt cared for. Now that little coterie of people around him, practically no Ghanaians around him now, and he's isolated from Ghanaians. George Padmore, his advisor from Trinidad, is dead. The key Ghanaians are not there. The head of the ideological institute has been going back to Nigeria. He's still alive. The head of his newspaper, Evening News, no longer effective because he's getting cross signals. Those South African communists moved in and effectively put a wedge between Nkrumah and the people of Ghana. And Nkrumah did not know what was happening in the country. Subsequently, the army revolted, partly edged on by the CIA. And the government has been going downhill since then. In my last trip to Ghana, I said that if Lieutenant Rawlins knew what a government was, he might be able to run one. If he at least knew what a government was, he might be able to at least assign someone to run. But that young man don't know what side is up. The old judges are being moved out. In Ghana, that had a head start over the rest of African nations, fallen back. Nkrumah's teacher, Joseph B. Dankwa, died in jail. That didn't help him at all. Joseph B. Dankwa would try to explain to him that you can have a traditional African state and a modern African state all at the same time. Traditional values, but modern methods. Because Dankwa had formerly been his schoolmaster and was now part of the opposition, he didn't listen that well. And yet, Nkrumah, more than any other African in this century, took Africa for her walk in the sun. He could well be the political father of modern Africa. But he tried to move too fast and sometimes with the wrong people. So when Nkrumah gone, the other African states were easy to knock off. The Congo had been wrecked by a combination of European intelligence. Now, by the 70s, the effective unification of Africa had been destroyed by neo-colonialist whites. America's move in southern Africa was really to save the whites in southern Africa. Many of the things Nkrumah had set in motion, African Solidarity, African People's Conference, the OAU, now the Arabs were acting the fool. They said, now how can, see, they didn't like the word black. When you said Pan-Africanism, they went, does that include me too? Well, if you live in Africa, we're trying to unite all Africa, include everybody who's living in Africa. So the Arab acts as though he owns a part of Africa and he's an invader. See, because everybody in Africa who cannot be called an African is either an invader or a descendant of an invader. Blacks can't thrash that out. American blacks and other Caribbean blacks was to go to Tanzania for 6 Pan-African Congress. They would end up arguing among themselves. Couldn't even get the language straightened out. America knew then that her nation within a nation was capable of hooking up with other Africans, and that once that hookup was made, we would no longer be addressed as a minority. And so they began systematically to spread dissension between Caribbeans, Black Americans, and Africans. And some of us stupidly fell for it, not knowing that they hated all of our guts. They don't favor one over the other. They are out to get all of us. And we have to start answering one to the other and stop all this dialogue, my slave master is better than your slave master. Slavery wasn't abolished any place. It was transformed. And if someone tell me that slavery, emancipation came in the Caribbean 30 years before it came here, you're not telling me anything. It was a fake when it came here. It was a fake when it came there. For neither one of us are free. When you have to depend on your former slave master for your shoes, your watch, your car, your basic way of life, even your toilet paper, a safety pin for your child's diaper, you can't lie to me and say that you are free. You are still an economic slave and a political slave. When you have to go to a mix-up European called Carl something, his last name escapes me at the moment, and think that this is the first time someone had advocated something called socialism or communism, that means you have read history poorly. Our social living predates their socialism. Our communalism predates their communism. And I'm saying take anything from any place you can for your salvation. For your salvation, draw on the intellectual heritage of the whole world, but start with your own intellectual heritage. And once you exhaust your own intellectual heritage, look around, see what else anybody's got to offer, and use it without apology. If Marx got anything to help you with, use it. But first, Use the resources within yourself. Use the ideas within yourself, which is the foundation of all of it. And don't become a slave to what is outside when you have not made the proper use of what is inside. All right. I'm going to talk about the aftermath of the civil rights movement from 73 to the present. I want to look at the whole of the African world, not now, but in the next lecture. Now, I just want to ask the question in conclusion, to what extent was the civil rights movement, the Federation movement in the Caribbean, the independent explosion in Africa, a rehearsal for the nation concept still to come? Why are we now reconsidering Marcus Garvey in a respectful way we never did before? Everything he advocated was advocated before he arrived, sometime 100 years before he arrived. What did he add that made him so attractive to so many people? And why is it Marcus Garvey, 47 years dead, won't let us bury him? Stubbornly standing above the grave and say, I dare you to put me in a grave. Because he offered us something that was missing. The concept of nation formation, nation management, and nation projection on the world as an aspect of power. Booker T. Washington, in a regional way, offered the same thing. W.E.B. Du Bois offered the same thing in a political way. There was a combination of great minds from the Caribbean islands, from Africa, and from the United States that offered these ideals about state. No people will be whole. No people can be fulfilled outside of a nation state where they determine part of the destiny. That was basically the message of Du Bois. It was basically the message of Booker T. Washington. It was the essential message of Marcus Garvey. If Robert Hill has done nothing else, and his proposed 8-volume work on Marcus Garvey's documents, he has pulled together the documents. Never mind his interpretation of the documents. The documents are there for you to interpret. And he's found documents that have been lost. In the last little book called Life and Lessons of Marcus Garvey, he has pulled together some of the principal, basic, simplified lessons of Marcus Garvey. This is the one, while the big books sell for $35, and maybe you're not amenable to that. They generally come down after 6 months. The University of California sells them for less than half of that. But the last one, published in paperback, on the life and lessons of Marcus Garvey, things we need to read about, things we need to hear what he had to say, because he was about yesterday and tomorrow, and about the whole concept of a people existing within the construct of a nation where they are in charge. I think our problem is going to remain so long as we are protracted guests in someone else's house. And the host has said, You either stay here on on my terms, or you go. A people must have not only a physical house for themselves, but a spiritual house for themselves, and a political and cultural house for themselves. Marcus Garvey projected the concept of the land base of nation. He knew that a wounded people will never be cured until they are the masters of the land and masters of the whole state structure. I think the freedom explosion, the independence explosion in Africa, the civil rights movement in the United States, and the concept of federation in the Caribbean introduced to us again the concept of nation, the concept of wholeness. Now we must match the concept with responsibility and be what we still can be. And we cannot go into the 21st century so dependent on other people that we have to measure all our lives by that of other people. We have to reach back in our history and remember how we made yesterday in order to make tomorrow. We are the only people, except the Chinese, properly counted throughout the world, number a billion people. We are the only people with an entire continent that belongs solely to us. And we have to produce the leaders, the road builders, the scientists, the politicians, the druggists. We have to produce the totality that goes into the making of a nation. We cannot will to our children this way of life, this protracted begging that we have had to do in order to stay on the earth, lo, these 400 years. I think tomorrow belongs to those who are prepared to prepare themselves for it and to take chances and seize it. Tomorrow belongs to those who believe that they are worthy of it. I think the decision as to what we will be is left with us and only with us. And once we make that decision, the whole world is going to change permanently. Thank you very much.